Hey everybody. I'm out in the garage doing an oil change on my 2015 Hyundai Santa Fe Sport. Doesn't really matter what make or model vehicle you have. This one has a little 4-cylinder gasoline direct injection motor. And if you have a vehicle with a GDI, then this video is for you. Gasoline direct injection or GDI motor is kind of a, I don't know, not new design. They've been around for quite a while. But they're newer than the actual fuel injected motors. When fuel injection came out, it was a really big thing, and GDI wasn't quite the next big thing. But the difference between this and typical fuel injection is that it's exactly what it says. It's a gasoline direct injection. In other words, the injector is in the cylinder and the air is already in there, the valve is closed, it starts to compress, the injector goes off and squirts the fuel in there, and then the spark plug sets it off, and the explosion happens, and most of the exhaust gases mostly go out your exhaust pipe and through your catalytic converter and stuff. The problem with any engine, not just GDIs, is that when you have cylinders with rings, some of the exhaust pressure, some of the exhaust fumes get sent down past the rings into your crankcase. And when they started making motors really pretty well, they found that they would blow seals out and it would do damage to the motor because that vapor pressure would build up from the exhaust gases. I don't know, 20, 30, 40 psi would damage the motor and blow seals out. So the way they combated this is they had a vent valve that would just take the pressure from the inside of the motor and vent it out of the ground. Well, in today's world of EPA and regulations and stuff, you can't do that. So what they did, instead of dumping it, they came up with sending it back into the air intake, so that now the exhaust fumes and oil vapors from the crankcase would get sent back into the air intake and burned and sent right out the exhaust pipe, and no fuss, no muss. In a traditional fuel-injected motor, the injectors are in the air intake. And if you look here, this is my air intake. The air cleaner is over there, comes up through here. This is the plenum that feeds to the air intake, which is down here. And in a traditional motor, a non-GDI motor, the injectors for the fuel would be in front of every cylinder in that air intake. And they would spray the fuel, and the air fuel mixture would get sucked into the cylinder when the valve would open. And then the valve would close, and then you'd have your explosion and the fumes would go out. You'd still have some of that seepage past the rings that would get worse as the motor would get older. Diesels particularly are prone to this. But that gasoline is a good solvent, and with that air fuel mixture in the air intake, it kept it clean. A GDI doesn't have that. The gasoline gets sprayed directly into the cylinder. So your positive crankcase ventilation system takes all those fumes and oil vapors and puts it right into your air intake and turns to soot. Think of a fireplace that has to be swept every few years. The same thing happens in a GDI air intake. And what'll happen is you'll get that plaquey, sticky, resiny stuff that would just kind of burn onto the air intake, would get bigger and bigger and plaque it up and cause performance problems. And what mechanics do when this happens, 100, 150,000 miles, depending on the car, how hard it's driven, how much wear and tear is on it, how well it's been kept up, they'll stick a borescope down there or a camera down there and go, oh, yep, here's what we need to do. We need to take it all apart, take the air intake off, and sandblast it. Well, they don't use sand. They use crushed walnut shells typically, and blow all that gunk off like a chimney sweep, get it nice and clean, and put it back on, and you'd get your performance back. You'd get your snappiness back, your fuel economy, the power would return, because those really slowly over time build up and affect your motor. So with a gasoline direct injection, somebody came up with a way to reduce that, I guess, and it's called an oil catch can, and this is it right here. And it goes in line between the top of your motor, which is where my vapor comes out. And this tube used to go right down here to the bottom of the air intake where the other one goes. This guy goes down to it. Anyway, it connects to the bottom of the air intake, and it is supposed to reduce the amount of fuel and of oil and exhaust vapor. Now, I bought this car used, 65,000 miles, about 18 months ago. It's only got 10,000 miles on it. Second oil change. I took the oil catch canister apart and found this. That looks like about 5 ounces of what was just vapor oil vapor, exhaust vapors, and hot fumes that came out of the motor that would be placking up the inside of the air intake. And I was really on the fence. Was an oil catch can worth it? Like I said, I thought they were just a bunch of hocus pocus, some voodoo. This motor is in good shape. It's always been taken care of. And that's 10,000 miles worth of blow-by. And it's caught in there. And all this thing does is it goes in between. There's a bunch of steel wool under here. This thing is cooler, so it helps condense the vapor into liquid and cleans it up at least somewhat, at least that much, before it sends it back into the motor. So is an oil catch can a good idea for a GDI? Gotta say, I think so. So if you're thinking about one, it's probably a good idea. This thing was $35 on Amazon. It's pretty cheap. You know, it's got a little dipstick so you can see how full it is. It took me about 40 minutes to put it on. It came with a hose, so you really just take the hose apart, put one end here, the other one goes the air intake. Bolting it on, trying to find a place for it is probably the hardest part, and that took, I don't know, 15 minutes. So there you go. Food for thought if you're thinking about an oil catch can for a GDI. There you go.